Group. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Friday's Diary Literary Series. Tonight, my guest from Lowell, Massachusetts, live from her dining room, Meg Smith. And Meg is a frequent flyer to these diaries. I'm really happy to feature her. And she's also a frequent flyer to the poetry scene in Massachusetts. And let's tell you a little bit about Meg. There she is during sunnier times.
That's me. In my
So
garden.
she has a lifetime love of writing. She has 4 poetry books and a book of short stories, which will be released soon. She was in the board of the Lowell Celebrates Jack Kerouac Festival, which I've been to, and it's wonderful. She has a passion for dancing and Middle Eastern dancing, and also I don't know. Well, I think we should probably just let this go and just hand it on over to Meg, because Meg's our feature and we want to get to her as soon as possible. If you're more interested in her website and her books, it's megsmithwriter.com. So check that out. And Meg, I'm happy to have you. And why don't you start us off with some of your work?
I sure will do that. And thank you for including me as the feature. I'm delighted to be here. And as Tim says, I live in Lowell, Mass. This has been my home for a long time, and I love it. It's a beautiful city. I actually have 5 poetry books, and my short fiction collection, The Plague Confessor, for which Sarah and I will read, is out hot off the presses, as they say. And so I'd actually like to start by reading a little bit from The Plague Confessor. It's a collection of short fiction, and it ranges a lot in terms of horror and speculative and some fantastical fiction and historical fiction. And so I'd like to read just a little bit from one of the poems, and one of the stories. I'll get to the poems a little later. It's called In Prehistoric Times, and it inspired a little bit by my elementary school in Somerville, Mass, where I went, and in no small part by my love of dinosaurs and the love of dinosaurs shared by many of my friends. So, In Prehistoric Times. In 1973, Billy Guthrie turned 9 years old. She was thin and her knees were sharp. Her hair fell flat and straight. At school, boys laughed at her, even though they mostly ignored girls. Girls screamed at her for doing or saying the wrong thing. It was as if all the girls were crowded into a flimsy boat and Billy threatened to capsize it. She, like they, was curious about makeup, motherhood, babies, or perhaps one day becoming a ballet dancer, a nurse, an astronaut, or maybe even a firefighter or a policewoman. But she was also curious about other things, like dinosaurs. She had a field guide about dinosaurs that her father found at a flea market. She carried it around with her everywhere. Her mother admonished her to stop looking at it except at home. People would think she didn't want to talk to them, her mother said. She couldn't explain to her mother or anyone that the field guide was like a sanctuary. It was a sanctuary from all the indignities at school. Saturday was for television, cartoons, and movies. Billy's mother also fretted about this. Billy didn't understand why. Saturday was her one day to watch television during the day. She loved the Saturday afternoon movie, and her favorite was 1 million years BC. It was the closest thing to real dinosaurs, which moved stiffly across the screen, but no matter. She loved a cartoon, Journey to the Lost World. The Lost World brought 20th century people together with cave people. The Lost World had dinosaurs. Billy knew dinosaurs were long gone before people arrived, but it didn't bother her. She would have given most anything to be around the same time as dinosaurs. What's your favorite dinosaur? She asked Walter, a boy in her class, at recess. Shut up, Walter said, throwing a pencil at her. The pencil struck lightly in the knee before hitting the floor with a snapping sound. Billy picked it up. Walter had thrown away a perfectly good pencil and turned his back to her. She could have stabbed him in the head with it, but she knew the recess monitor would blame her and not Walter. She knew because this had all happened before with another boy, Joey, who had thrown a rock at her. The rock hit her in the eye. She threw it back at Joey and ended up writing, "I will not throw rocks," 100 times on a paper before the teacher ripped them up. Joey was not punished, but about a week later, he was held in detention when he managed to get into the teacher's lounge with a marker and scrawl on the door, "You're, Y-O-U-R, all pigs." No one cared that his grammar was bad. His friends were impressed. When he wrote it down for his classmates, Billy smirked at the incorrect "your," but said nothing. Billy moved through the school day and recess in the same way, as if through corridors in a dream. Noise around her was blurry and faded. She tried playing jump rope with some of the girls. A tallish girl named Marie always seemed to be in charge. She told her mother about the jump rope group and said how she didn't like Marie for being bossy. "We'll try," her mother had said. "Just do your best." The next time at recess, Billy reluctantly came to the jump rope group. They stared at her and then looked back at Marie. "Can I join?" she asked. One girl, Kathy, said, "We're playing queen bee. The bee chases the other girl through the rope. If you trip, you're out." The school play area, like most play areas, was asphalt. "Okay," Billy said. Things went fairly well because no one chose Billy as the queen bee or as the person to chase. Behind her, someone murmured, "Just do it. She'll trip and then she'll be out." It hurt, but Billy shrugged it off. And before she realized what she was saying, Billy asked Marie, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" "Billy," Marie guffawed, "get serious. No one cares about dinosaurs." "I do," Billy said, and walked away. No one threw anything at her. For Marie and her group, recess time was fleeting and not to be wasted. The jump rope game had already resumed. The girls chanted witch-like, "Queen bee chasing me, I choose Caroline." So that's from the story in prehistoric times in my short fiction collection, The Plague Confessor. And now I would like to change channels a little bit, as it were. I'm not really changing channels on y'all, I'm still here. I'd like to read from my recent poetry book, which is called Pretty Green Thorns. And the poetry in this book is inspired mainly by my Irish American heritage. I am a first generation Irish American. And the poems in this book talk a lot about my family there in Ireland, as well as my Charlestown, Boston family on my father's side. And many of the things that have influenced my life that have come from that heritage. So I just wanted to read a couple of selections from this. The first poem is called Summer Music. It's in memory of my mother's brother, Michael, and his son, John Buckley, who are both musicians and rock and roll rebels in their own right. And it is inspired by a summer visit in 1982, where my cousin's small bedroom, which he shared with his brother, Kevin, was absolutely covered with rock posters of every rock band you could imagine. And it was like a portal into this electrifying world of music. So I dedicate it to Michael and John Buckley and their memory. Summer Music. Rock's Hall of Fame begins here. 2 narrow beds and the walls of the Pantheon in magazine gloss. Rush, Rory Gallagher, Motorhead, Metal on Metal, Tin Lizzy, Maid Lazarus. The strands of the helix carry the sound. This dark-haired man, uncle, father, brother, up in that room, awash in rock photos, rattles the roof with North to Alaska. In the kitchen, he serenades the parrot with Little Red Rooster. You would both fall and you would both rise to play Buddy Holly, a wedding concert. The thunder rises from this green earth. I pray you sing then and play in the dusk of Samhain, rattling the veil. And I should mention Samhain is a term that's co-opted in our popular culture, but to the Irish, it's a very sacred time to honor those who have gone beyond. So I honor my uncle and cousin who have gone beyond. And the next poem I'd like to read comes to my also from my childhood in Somerville. This was a somewhat catastrophic event of swimming at the public beach there, but was also strangely like crossing over and then coming back. And this poem is called "The Day We Drowned." Our hands were holding the sky to the green bed of the lake. Around us, ripples form the circle of the sun. Air is falling, the shore collapses, and nothing will run. Nothing will save us. Some primal things we are creatures to walk up on land, to walk up from the primal jelly mass of life and life. We breathe and say amen. To cling, to walk. We breathe and say amen. And this next poem I'd like to read is called "The Dark Street." And my life is established here in Lowell, Mass, but many times I think my ancestors speak to me, and in Irish culture traditionally, it's a very fluid passage in any case. So, "The Dark Street." The night runs deep to music. Lights splash across the windows, the sidewalks, scarlet, blue morning. A crowd emerges like beings from spaceships. Someone has gone to sleep. You know it, and I know it. That's why you called me or not. We both know black lines running vein to vein, but that symphony is done. There's some trek of silence in just two corners. I have just two more poems that I'd like to read from Pretty Green Thorns. And before I do that, I wanted to quickly mention something about the cover of this book. I usually model for my own covers, and this picture was taken when I was playing around in a Norman castle in my aunt's village, where I spent quite a lot of time. And the veil, by the way, was originally purple, but I changed it to green. I thought that was more fitting. And so my books have also become a way to try to explore a visual medium as well. So this poem is called "The Alewife League," and inspired a little bit by so many passages I've made through the Alewife station on the Red Line in Cambridge, whether to poetry readings or to dance gigs or to meet friends. And it's become very much kind of a crossroads between worlds. So the Alewife League. Some truths are silver, basking among reeds. A train passes clacking and all below unnoticed. But you read them in sure gold eyes. The call of the past left strands floating, webbed in marsh grass. And I know you, friend to all, fine-boned and finned. And I release you to their white waiting froth. And lastly, it being November, I wanted to read a poem for the season. It's called "The November Sun." And thank you all for listening to my work tonight. I appreciate everyone being here in the virtual sense, which is still very much the real sense for me. The November Sun. Cold light swept across the fallen leaf, across the fallen trees, silver and green, immersed in the new life, writhing like a great city. There our breath dithered, frozen in tendrils across the bog. Silence is like falling. I am walking in my finest sleep. Summer cannot hold me. Those still awake, the winter will surely catch them out. I'm Meg Smith. Thank you for listening. I've been reading from my poetry book, Pretty Green Thorns, and my short fiction collection, The Plague Confessor. And thanks again for listening tonight. And I look forward to the open mic as well.
All right, thanks, Meg. So I got some questions for you, and I think that the Q&A is going to be a little bit less time than usual because we pushed a little late. But I thank you for your versatility. It was really nice to have a short story and some of your poems. So I got a question for. We'll open with a question on the chat. So, what's your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur is the Stegosaurus. And I have a whole collection of Stegosaurus figurines. Without a doubt, Stegosaurus is number one.
So with your 5 books of poetry, when you held up the Plague Confessor, couldn't really see the title. So the title is The Plague Confessor.
Right. Well, I'll hold it up again. How's that?
There you go. So between poetry and short stories and let's include dance too, which genre is your sweet spot, do you think?
Well, I think that depends on the spot and the spot to which I travel. They're all really different ways of expressing things. I think short stories require a unique kind of discipline that first begins with sort of letting yourself go and pushing back boundaries, and then finding a way to take everything that you've gathered in that process and making it concise and making it relatable not only to yourself, but to the reader. And poetry, I think, is often thought of as a medium that's a little more spontaneous, and I suppose in some ways it is. But again, however personal or private the expression is in poetry, again, for the reader or the listener, in this case, because poetry and storytelling both, of course, begin being spoken aloud in human history. It has to make some sense. It has to make some connection with the person who's reading or listening. And in terms of dance, I began kind of a lifelong love with Oriental dance, honestly, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. But I last year celebrated my 25th anniversary in professional dancing. And Oriental dance, among many dance forms, has certainly a cultural history and a history within Western culture of being very personal and expressive, and a certain amount of spontaneity. And I think that's all true. But there again, when the dancer's on the stage, whatever I'm expressing as the dancer might come deep from within me, from my heart, my joy, sorrow, whatever, but it still has to connect with the person watching. In other words, there has to be a bond. It has to be a dialogue.
Much like what you said with the short story. Now,
Exactly.
With your short story book, and see if we can relate this question to connections you can make with a short story. Traditional short stories always were like 3,000, 5,000 words plus, and seems like the short stories get shorter and shorter, and flash fiction is now really, really popular, and a lot of people write in that way. So tell me a little bit about the length of the stories in your new book, and also the difference in connecting with a short or a longer piece of fiction.
Sure. Most of the short stories in this book, I would say, are in the sort of middling 3,000 to 5,000 word range, thereabouts. And I should say they also span a time frame of the early 90s to the present in terms of when they were written. And I honestly say and I know the flash fiction that you're mentioning, Tim, that's become really popular. And I have to say, I have a great admiration for that, to be able to tell a story and say everything that needs to be said in that story in 1,000 to 1,500 words, or in another form known as the drabble, which I think is like 100 to 500 words. That really creates a challenge for the writer to rise to the occasion. And I do have stories that are in more or less the 1,500 word range. And honestly, I think all of those lengths, all of those genres have their value, and they present different ways of telling a good story.
So Also, there's a question here. You're reading the rock and roll short story. Were your friends related to Tim and Jeff Buckley?
Tim and Jeff Buckley, I don't believe that they were. Buckley, and that was my family actually. That's my mother's family name, Buckley, which in Irish Gaelic is actually Buchla, which means boy. And I think actually I did a little bit of research into that, and it seems to mysteriously be about a boy who, and I'm loosely translating here, who was raised in or grew up in the woods, and as someone who loves walking in the forest. That suits me. So I'm sure Tim and Jeff Buckley are probably distant family and friends on the sprawling family tree of the Buckleys, and the fact that there's so many Irish people living in the diaspora. I'm sure we're connected though in some way.
So as a board member of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, when this happens, is it going to go? Has it gone back live? Has the festival gone back live, or how is it doing, and how has the pandemic affected like a festival such as that?
Well, first of all, yes, this year's festival, the 2021 festival, was live, and the festival organizers, the current folks on the board, I have to say they did and have done a tremendous job in terms of being able to present that festival in person. And in some cases, what they did was they moved some events outside, because the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festival takes place usually the first weekend in October. And fortunately, the weather did cooperate and prevail. And there was a wonderful dedication at Kerouac Park in the memory of Roger Brunel, who was one of the founding members and a tour guide, and as well as a linguist. And a really popular event during the festival always is the David Amram Jam. David Amram, of course, the composer, was a close friend of Jack Kerouac. He comes almost every year, and the weather thankfully held out just as we were getting ready to leave. And I'm honored to say that I was featured as a poet at this year's festival, and I really appreciate them thinking of me and including me. So I really, my hat is off to them for being able to have that in-person festival safely and joyfully.
And just for the record, Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. It's Lowell, Massachusetts. It's not Robert Lowell or Mike Lowell. It's in Lowell, Massachusetts.
Yes, that's the city where Jack Kerouac was born and raised, and he wrote 5 books inspired by his upbringing in Lowell.
Now, when the Massachusetts Poetry Festival was in Lowell for its initial year, were you involved in that at all?
I don't believe that I was, but would certainly look forward to that. Lowell is certainly a fitting place to, I would argue, to have a literary festival. Lowell, I know we think of largely as an industrial city, which it was and is, but Lowell has also had a naturally occurring literary heritage going back to the mill girls who published, imagine, if you will, young girls working 12 to 15-hour days in a factory and still publishing a literary magazine called the Lowell Offering. And Edgar Allan Poe famously came through Lowell to present a paper. I also produced an event called the Edgar Allan Poe Show, which honors Poe's presence in Lowell. And it's really little wonder that some of the stature of Jack Kerouac came about, and that he wrote so much about Lowell itself.
Also, well, your love and your lifelong love of writing led you to a career in journalism. Now, once you reached that career in journalism, were you still writing out of love, or was it work at that point?
Well, I do love being a journalist. It is work, like as I think any career would be work. The intriguing thing about journalism, and this was said to me by the very first editor who hired me at the Lowell Sun, which is the daily newspaper in Lowell, was that being a good reporter is about fact gathering first, and the writing of really being secondary. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense, because there's a tremendous responsibility, I think we can all agree, in journalism. And I want to state here, without apology or qualifications, I'm speaking of professional journalists. That's very different from someone who publishes a blog where they're simply expressing opinions. That's perfectly fine, but it is not the same as someone who, say, came up through the ranks covering school committee meetings and city council meetings and covering accidents, or having to talk to someone who's been in the middle of a tragedy and speak to them in a dignified and sensitive way. And it is certainly not simply putting out a filtered view of the world.
But what happens if you
like one worldview?
But what happens if you write your blog in an inverted pyramid style?
Like a Dylan Thomas poem? I'm not.
That's the journalist that you the lead, and then you go to the thin details. So tell me, what do you think is the future of journalism?
I think the future of journalism is in the hands of people who value journalism as part of a democracy. Journalism plays a lot of roles. Journalism is about storytelling, but the stories are obviously not something that is the creation or the imagination of the writer. In fact, really the journalist is telling a story that someone is living. So that in itself is a tremendous responsibility. But to truly be a journalist, you have to be willing to do the work, to have that discipline, to put out a story that represents all sides. And that's why what I do and what my colleagues do is not the same as, quite frankly, some of the venues that purport to be journalism. And an informed citizen knows and understands the difference and supports journalism, not only things that cater to their worldview, but that represent all points of view. And I think it's a wondrous place to be as a writer. It's taken me on many adventures. I've met a lot of incredible people. I've traveled to different places in the world. But there is basically a partnership. The consumer has to be willing to support journalists and what we do. That means not complaining about being asked to subscribe even online. It's not a commercial, but this is a critical juncture, I believe, in journalism and in our democracy. And I say that, wholly with authenticity.
Okay, now does it anger you with as journalism kind of gets disrespected by some factions, and also just that newspapers seem to be falling by the wayside?
Well, I think anybody who does a job where your work is out for the public to see, for everyone to see, going into it, that perhaps not everyone's going to like or agree with what you're doing, and you kind of accept that as part of your responsibility. And I will say that I've been working in journalism now for 3 decades. It's the work that I love. I'm very naturally suited to it. I think as not only a storyteller, but someone who likes to listen to stories and hear good stories. And I think as long as there are people who understand and value that, we'll see the way forward. Both the people who appreciate good journalism and those of us who work hard to produce it.
And you also were associate editor of Belly Dance New England magazine. Now, do you hire a lot of mid writers for that?
Well, I'm an editor emeritus for Belly Dance New England. I was the associate editor for about 13 years. And that was a wonderful experience. And what we did was basically to chronicle the Middle Eastern dance scene in the Big Six, as we said. And Middle Eastern dancers, people who practice Oriental dance and different kinds of Middle Eastern dance, are a fascinating community in and of itself. There are people, women primarily, of so many different backgrounds. And I've met a lot of amazing people there. And by the way, I've had a chance to kind of bring some of my different worlds together. As a journalist and an Oriental dancer, I've been able to travel to the Middle East. And I found that experience of as an Oriental dancer made me a better journalist because it was like a passport, to a place and to have a conversation. And I cherish that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So I'm going to close out with a question and this was a quote I found on your website about writing. And you said, there's always something to create, be created by, and to learn, which is a quote I agree with completely. So that being said, what are you currently learning as you
Well,
write?
Thank you for that question. I consider myself a lifelong learner. And I find that, say, when I'm writing a short story, albeit, for example, a work of fiction, we were chatting a little while ago before we started about a short story that I had just written. And I was thinking to myself, I don't really know very much about swans. I like them, but I'm going to stop and I am going to do a little bit of research here. So the story, even though it's a fantastical story about that concerns swans as shapeshifters, I still wanted to, as much as I can as a layperson, understand, well, what is swan behavior? What do they actually do? Do they migrate? Do they stick around when it gets cold? What do they like to eat? So as to not, when there's a beautiful creature like a swan, as human beings, we sort of naturally project certain things onto them. And so I would say that every day there's something new to learn as a writer, and I hope to be a lifelong learner. I hope to be a student in everything that I do.
Well, thank you so much, Meg. And if you want some more information, what happened to my share? If you want some more information, let's see if we'll try this again. There it is. Look up Meg at megsmithwriter.com, and there's all kinds of great stuff. There's all of her books are here. And you can buy them directly from Meg, or you can shop around. And it also says that she has a favorite bookstore in Lowell, Massachusetts. Meg, what's your favorite bookstore in Lowell, Massachusetts?
Well, there's a fantastic new bookstore called Lala Books in Lowell, Mass. And for anyone who lives in Lowell or wants to come our way and visit us, it's a great store. It supports local writers, and definitely check them out. And as Tim mentioned, I have an online store at megsmithwriter.com. And so the Play Confessor, and yes, to make sure everybody saw the cover this time, there it is. That's me, by the way, in a dance show called Dance Macabre. And so, yeah, I do put myself out there. And then Pretty Green Thorns is the other one. That's me hanging about in a Norman Irish castle. So you can order the books at megsmithwriter.com, in which case I'd be most glad and honored to sign it for you as well.
Well, thank you so much, Meg, and thank the folks that are watching the stream on Facebook. Just a reminder for those folks, you can still use the Zoom link if you want to be involved in the open mic, which is coming up, and also to be involved in the Q&A in future weeks. And next week we have Gregory Wallace. So please continue to watch. Meg, thanks once again. That was wonderful, and we'll be staying on here in the Zoom. So people on Facebook, good night to y'all.